USS Wichita was the last heavy cruiser to be built by the United States Navy under the constraints of the interwar naval treaties, and she was unique in that she was the only member of her class. Originally intended to be a member of the New Orleans class, Wichita's design was reworked as naval architects took the standard 8-inch main battery of a heavy cruiser and placed it on a hull derived from the light cruisers of the Brooklyn class, but with increased armor protection. Her secondary battery guns were arranged to give better fields of fire, and her main battery was mounted in a new turret design that rectified the dispersion problems of her predecessors. The next U.S. heavy cruiser class, the unencumbered Baltimore class, was heavily influenced by Wichita's design. Wichita was equipped with a main battery of 9 8-inch 55 caliber guns that were housed in 3 3-gun turrets. These fired 335-pound projectiles at a muzzle velocity of 2,500 feet per second, and, at their maximum elevation of 41 degrees, they could send shell fire over 30,000 yards. Wichita was the first heavy cruiser to be equipped with the 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose gun as her secondary battery weapon, and she had 8 of these located in single mounts. 4 of these were enclosed, and 4 were open mounts. Her light anti-aircraft battery at the time of her commissioning consisted of 8 50 caliber machine guns. During her wartime overhauls, her AA battery was continuously upgraded, and by 1945, she had 4 quad and 4 twin mounts of 40mm Bofors guns and 18 single-mounted 20mm Oerlikon autocannons. Wichita had an overall length of 608 feet, a beam of 61 feet, and displaced over 10,000 tons. Her main armor belt was 6.4 inches thick, and it tapered to 4 inches on either end. She had 2¼ inches of deck armor, and her main battery turrets were protected by 8-inch thick faceplates. Wichita was rated for 100,000 shaft horsepower and had a top speed of 33 knots. She was powered by 8 oil-fired boilers and 4 turbines, and had a cruising range of 10,000 nautical miles at 15 knots. Wichita's keel was laid down on October 28, 1935, at the Philadelphia Navy Yard, and she was launched 2 years later. She was commissioned into the United States Navy on February 16, 1939, and after visiting Houston in late April, she conducted her shakedown cruise in the Caribbean Sea before returning to Philadelphia for post-shakedown repairs. In September, she was assigned to Cruiser Division 7 of the Atlantic Fleet. Wichita spent the rest of 1939, 1940, and 1941 operating throughout the Atlantic, where she conducted training drills and neutrality patrols. In August 1941, Wichita, along with the carrier Wasp and battleship Mississippi, were deployed to the waters around Iceland to protect the shipping lanes to Great Britain. Another priority of theirs was checking German encroachment into the Denmark Strait to the north. By late September, Wichita was essentially operating under wartime conditions as she had received orders to protect all ships engaged in commerce with the United States and report or destroy any German or Italian naval forces that were encountered. 2 weeks later, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued orders to shoot on sight any vessel threatening United States shipping or shipping under U.S. escort. Wichita, as a member of Task Group 7.5, remained engaged in patrol operations in Icelandic waters through the end of the year. On January 15, 1942, a powerful storm rocked Iceland. Battling sustained winds of 90 miles per hour and gusts up to 120, Wichita was damaged when a freighter drifted into her bow, and again when a British trawler struck her side. She then ran aground. She was subsequently dispatched to the Brooklyn Navy Yard for repairs, which lasted until late February. On March 26, Wichita departed the United States to reinforce the British home fleet. The aircraft carrier Wasp, the battleship Washington, the cruiser Tuscaloosa, and 8 destroyers made the trip as well. While en route, the task force commander, Rear Admiral John W. Wilcox, Jr., was swept overboard in heavy seas and lost. Rear Admiral Robert C. Giffen, who was flying his flag in Wichita, took command of the task force. After arriving in Scapa Flow, Wichita and her cohorts spent several weeks training with their British counterparts. In late April, Wichita participated in her first major operation with the British when she was assigned to escort the Arctic-bound convoy PQ-15. The American component, organized as Task Force 99, included Washington, Wichita, Tuscaloosa, and 4 destroyers. For the rest of May and June as well, she patrolled the Denmark Strait north of Iceland and escorted several convoys as they passed through her patrol area. In late June, she got underway to provide distant cover to convoy PQ-17 as it made its way to the Soviet Union. Tensions were high on Wichita as the cruiser plowed north through heavy seas and harsh weather. Intelligence reports indicated that the Germans were organizing a powerful task force to attack the convoy, centered on the battleship Tirpitz and 3 heavy cruisers. But, aware that their intentions had been detected, the Germans aborted the surface operation and turned the attack over to their U-boats and the Luftwaffe. In late July, Wichita began experiencing propeller shaft vibrations, which forced her to be dry-docked at the Royal Navy base in Rosyth, Scotland. A remedy could not be found, so she steamed to New York for further repairs, which lasted until early September. After this, she conducted refresher training off the East Coast, before getting underway on October 24th with Task Force 34.1 to participate in Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa. The main objective of Wichita's task force, which included the battleship Massachusetts and the heavy cruiser Tuscaloosa, was to prevent the French fleet, including the battleship Jean Bart, immobilized in the harbor but equipped with a fully functional 4-gun 15-inch turret, from interfering with the invasion. On November 8th, Wichita went to general quarters just after 5:30 a.m. An hour and a half later, as her task group approached Casablanca Harbor, she engaged her first target of the day, which was the shore battery on Point El Hank that was firing 200-pound armor-piercing shells at the approaching U.S. warships. For the next hour and a half, Wichita and her pals pounded anything that moved inside the harbor. At 9 a.m., a group of French destroyers attempted to attack the landing beaches to the east. The French destroyer Milan ended up beaching herself after being severely damaged by gunfire from Wichita and Tuscaloosa. A second attempt about an hour later, this time employing the light cruiser Primogay, met a similar fate. Just before 11:30, Wichita once more came within the range of the battery at El Hank and was hit by a 194mm shell on her port side. The shell passed into her second deck near the mainmast and detonated inside a living compartment. Fragments injured 14 men, but none seriously, and the resulting fires were quickly extinguished by Wichita's damage control parties. Just after 3 p.m., Wichita ceased fire for the day and steamed out to open ocean for the evening. Over the ensuing days, she patrolled offshore between Casablanca and Fadala before being dispatched to the Brooklyn Navy Yard for repairs to her battle damage. After her repairs were completed, she got underway for the Pacific Theater, where she got her first taste of action against her new enemy during the Battle of Rennell Island in late January. While operating in the vicinity of Rennell Island to the south of Guadalcanal, her task force came under aerial attack on the evening of January 29th. The planes, torpedo-carrying Betty bombers, focused on the heavy cruiser Chicago, and she took 2 torpedo hits within a minute. After setting 2 Bettys ablaze, Wichita took another one under fire as it passed overhead from her starboard quarter after dropping its payload. One torpedo broached and ran parallel to Wichita off her starboard beam, while the other one headed directly for her. Fortunately for Wichita and her crew, this torpedo, which did strike her, proved to be a dud. Chicago was taken under tow by the heavy cruiser Louisville, and the formation attempted to retire from the area. However, more Bettys attacked again the next afternoon, and Chicago took 4 more torpedoes and quickly sank. Wichita's next stop on her Pacific Theater tour was the Aleutian Islands, where she arrived during the 3rd week of April. Upon her arrival, she immediately led an offensive sweep to the west and northwest of Attu Island, before operating with the battleships New Mexico and Nevada during May and June. In July, she participated in the shelling of Kiska Island on the 6th and again on the 22nd. 5 days later, malfunctioning radar equipment led to the Battle of the Pips, in which Wichita, 2 battleships, and 2 other heavy cruisers expended over 1,000 rounds of main battery ammunition on an empty sea. The morning after the assumed engagement, Wichita launched her float plane to reconnoiter the area, and it found no evidence of Japanese forces. In fact, based on Japanese records reviewed after the war, no Japanese warships were within 200 miles of the U.S. ships at the time. She withdrew from the Aleutian Theater in mid-August for an overhaul which lasted until early December. On January 6, 1944, she was assigned to Task Group 58.3 of the newly formed Fast Carrier Task Force of the U.S. Fifth Fleet. Her new charges included the fleet carrier Bunker Hill and the light carriers Monterey and Cowpens. The new fast battleships Iowa and New Jersey were also members of her new group, along with 9 destroyers. Task Group 58.3 supported operations to take the Marshall Islands in late January. As Wichita screened the carriers, their pilots struck enemy positions throughout the island group into early February. On February 12th, she got underway with Task Group 58.2 to participate in Operation Hailstone. During Hailstone, which was the massive 2-day attack on the Japanese base at Truk Lagoon, Wichita screened the carriers of her group as they conducted airstrikes on Japanese installations and shipping. On the night of February 17th, the aircraft carrier Intrepid was struck by a torpedo from a Japanese plane shortly after midnight. Wichita escorted the crippled carrier back to Majuro, then to Pearl Harbor. She was back at Majuro by March 20th, and for the remainder of the month supported carrier strikes against Japanese installations in the Palau Islands. In mid-April, Wichita supported strikes on Hollandia in New Guinea, ahead of and during the landings there on the 21st. Her task group struck Truk Atoll again on April 29th, and, while the carriers conducted more strikes on Truk the next day, Wichita and 8 other heavy cruisers shelled Japanese installations on Satawan Island. After a month of rest, replenishment, and training, Wichita's next action came during Operation Forager, the conquest of the Mariana Islands. On June 15th, she began pummeling Japanese installations along the southern coast of Saipan, and that evening she covered the retirement of empty transport vessels. The next day, she shelled Japanese positions on the west coast of Guam before returning to Saipan late in the day. On the 18th, Wichita formed up with Task Group 58.7, which was a powerful surface force containing Task Force 58's battleships and heavy cruisers. Under the command of Vice Admiral Willis Lee, this unit was deployed to the west of the carrier groups over the next several days as the Battle of the Philippine Sea played out. Although it weakened the anti-aircraft defense of the carrier groups, this formation provided a powerful surface unit ready for immediate deployment had the Japanese attempted an end run around Task Force 58 to threaten the invasion beaches. On the 19th, Wichita's group ended up being the group whose gunners saw the most action, as they were the first U.S. ships encountered by the few Japanese pilots that managed to make it through the deadly fighter screen. Wichita's gunners assisted with bringing down 2 enemy torpedo bombers, and her float plane rescued a downed U.S. pilot that afternoon. Wichita continued to operate throughout the Mariana Islands into July. She shelled Japanese installations on the west coast of Guam from the 8th through the 12th, and after several days replenishing off Saipan, returned to provide on-call fire support from July 18th to August 10th. She departed Guam on the 10th, and after 3 days at Eniwetok, she got underway with Task Group 38.1. Her task group struck Japanese installations in the Palaus, Carolines, Philippines, and Dutch East Indies during the rest of August and most of September. After a brief stop at Manus Island for replenishment, she was underway again in early October, this time for strikes on Okinawa, Luzon, and Formosa. After the heavy cruiser Canberra was struck by a torpedo off Formosa on the 13th, Wichita took her under tow until the morning of the 15th, when she was relieved by the fleet tug Muncie. Wichita subsequently covered the stricken cruiser, as well as the light cruiser Houston, who had also taken a torpedo, until they were out of harm's way. On October 21st, she joined the fleet off Luzon, which then proceeded south to Leyte to support the amphibious operations going on there. On the 24th, as the Battle of Leyte Gulf got underway, Wichita's task group conducted strikes on the Japanese southern force before steaming north late in the day to attack the Japanese northern force. That evening, as they raced north, Admiral William F. Halsey, who was in overall tactical command of the fast carrier task force, assigned his battleships and several heavy cruisers, including Wichita, to the newly created Task Force 34. The next day, after carrier strikes had depleted the Japanese northern force somewhat, Task Force 34, minus elements which had been detached to provide support to the action off Samar, was detached to finish off several of the crippled Japanese ships with gunfire. Wichita helped sink the light carrier Chiyoda and the destroyer Hatsuzuki, during which she expended over 350 armor-piercing rounds. She spent the remainder of the month on carrier escort duty off Samar and provided on-call fire support when needed. After replenishing on November 2nd, she returned to the Leyte area where she operated until the middle of November, when her crew detected severe vibrations in her No. 4 engine. The propeller shaft had broken, and the propeller was trailing. She was detached on the 18th for repairs stateside. Before she could get underway for the West Coast, another inspection revealed cracks in the strut for her No. 3 propeller shaft. Now, only 2 of her screws were operational. Wichita reached San Pedro, California on December 15th and entered the Terminal Island Navy Yard shortly thereafter. Her repairs lasted until February 1945, and she rejoined the fleet on March 20th, where she was assigned to the Fire Support Group, or Task Force 54, for the invasion of Okinawa. Her first action came on the 25th, as she covered minesweepers operating off Hagushi Beach. Over the next week, she shelled Japanese positions and installations in her sector and helped fight off several air attacks. After the invasion kicked off on April 1st, Wichita provided fire support and covered ongoing minesweeping activities throughout the following week. On the evening of April 6th, a kamikaze made a run on Wichita. The plane came down through a break in the clouds on her port side. Her anti-aircraft gunners immediately opened up, and a burst from one of her 20mm guns shot away the attacker's tail. The plane dropped its 500-pound bomb harmlessly into the sea, but its wing clipped Wichita's stern before crashing into the sea. 11 men were wounded, but she remained on station. The following day, Wichita steamed into Nakagusuku Bay to shell a coastal battery. Shells from the Japanese guns landed close aboard, but no hits were scored, and Wichita neutralized the battery. Over the next 2 days, she continued to bombard Japanese defenses on the island, until she retired to replenish ammunition on April 10th. Wichita continued to provide gunfire support throughout the rest of April. On the 27th, she was struck by a small caliber shell below her waterline. The damage was repaired by the 30th, and she returned to the gun line, where on May 12th, she was struck by friendly fire. A 5-inch round struck the port aircraft catapult, killing 1 man and wounding 11 others. She departed for Leyte, where she remained until mid-June. For the remainder of the war, she provided surface and air protection for minesweepers operating to the west of Okinawa. Wichita was assigned to occupation duties in Japanese waters soon after the cessation of hostilities. Her men inspected harbor installations and ships for Japanese compliance with the terms of surrender. She then participated in Operation Magic Carpet, helping to repatriate American servicemen from the Pacific back to the United States. However, with the war over and newer, more modern cruiser designs now in service, the need for treaty cruisers like Wichita had diminished. On February 14, 1946, she was placed in the reserve fleet at the Philadelphia Yard and was formally decommissioned the next year. Stricken from the Naval Vessel Register on March 1, 1959, she was sold later that year and ultimately broken up by the Union Minerals and Alloys Corporation in Port Panama City, Florida. Wichita was awarded 13 battle stars for her World War II service. Thank you for watching, and as always, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us out, and we greatly appreciate it. Once again, thank you for watching.